So I'm going to try and talk today a little bit about one of the most important things that's happened in marketing and tech over the last couple of years. So as a broad sense of the audience, who uses Google still to find products or services? Cool. And who uses ChatGPT to find things? Okay. So in this room, you have almost 100% of people using ChatGPT to find products or services, but then also everyone else is also using Google to find products or services. And the big change there is for 20 years, whenever you've looked to buy a product, to buy a service, to do all the things the previous panel were talking about in terms of locating a product or having brand exposure or whatever it might be, you would, in the background, research that product yourself. And so now we have a different interface. People are no longer searching keywords, they're searching a much longer query, which has much longer context. So instead of just saying CRM for small business, you would type in, I'm looking for a CRM for a small business to target hospitality clients. And you do, by the nature of the search, you have changed the pattern of how you search. And so the other big thing to bear in mind is that with Google, 50% of all the queries you now get in Google are AI overviews anyway. And so we've had this continuous back and forth debate over the last couple of months about whether AI search is going to be here to stay, whether it's going to change a huge amount. And the situation we actually find ourselves in is that 50% of all the Google search is AI anyway. And so for all businesses right now, optimizing to come up in these LLMs is critical for your awareness. And so today, I thought I'd give you a little bit of background as to how to think about that problem, and then a little bit of context and tactics as to how to succeed within that problem. So a bit of background on myself first. I suppose by this point in my life, I would say I'm just an entrepreneur, and I will probably continue being an entrepreneur. But in my 20s, I built a business called Verb, which was an SEO and PPC agency for luxury brands. I sold the business when I was 30. I then built a company called Lottie. Has anyone heard of Lottie out of interest? Yeah? So Lottie helps, it was like driven by family pain with our grandparents, but it helps millions of families find care homes for their parents or grandparents. And in 2 years, that business became one of the UK's leading startups, valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, and now helps millions of families a year. And then have done lots of other stuff, but as the introduction was given, Searchable effectively launched 5 months ago. It has been a crazy journey. And what we do now is we show people how they appear in AI search. So we'll show someone how they appear in ChatGPT or where their competitor appears. And then we synthesize why. And so the tool will start telling you why a competitor is beating you. What piece of content or what piece of marketing has led to them being the answer that comes up in ChatGPT. And then we've now given all of our customers an agent within the platform that you can chat to on Slack or chat to on Teams, and it will go and do vast amounts of the work that you would ordinarily do. And so I could Slack it and say, can you make sure that you send me a report every morning of these statics? Or can you go and write the baseline plan for that article? Or find me the sources that are resulting in my competitor being number one instead of me. And it will go and do all those things for you. And so that's what we launched. And it's been a crazy couple of months. But what is very evident is that if you're a buyer right now looking for certain categories or certain products, you are spending your entire time on AI looking for those products. You're almost completely bypassing traditional search. And so for everyone in the room who deals with enterprise customers, the number one stated platform for finding new vendors is AI. And so when we think about what that means, this on the left-hand side is kind of what Google looks like. You have ads at the top, and then you have pages and pages and pages of blue results. And traditionally, all of us would go through those results, click them, open lots of tabs, and then assess them ourselves as to whether we think one or the other is the right decision. Whereas now, the experience is far more like the right-hand side. So you put in the query, and it does all of that in the background, and it doesn't show you all the blue links. It just suggests to you one or two options for your query. And so nowadays, instead of having a situation where you could be, third or fourth ranked and probably in consideration, it's much more brutal in the sense that there isn't a list structure to how AI search works in the same way. And so customers can become completely invisible. The other reason why this is very important is that for 20 years, we've worked in marketing. We have tried to drive traffic to our websites. That's pretty much what marketing, the digital marketing function, and broadly the marketing function has been about: awareness and traffic. Whereas you now have this term zero click, which is that the answer is given within the search engine. So you get the answer you need, and you no longer have to go to the website anymore. And so the metric to determine whether you're being successful has changed for the first time in a long time. And so even if you think about the Google example, something happened last week, which I think changes everything all over again, which is if you go onto Google and you search certain queries and it gives you an AI overview, so it answers your question for you at the top of Google, it's now released something called AI mode, and you now stay on Google. They bring up the website within Google, and now you never leave Google. And so as a marketeer, how do you attribute that? How do you think about that? And at the moment, those are very challenging questions, because if a certain competitor becomes the recommended answer in AI ahead of you, your visibility to those customers becomes much, much, much less. And so your buyers do most of the work before you ever meet them. So these are some stats that I pulled together just to give a bit of insight from our customers. Most of our customers are predominantly enterprise businesses. So 11 to 20 stakeholders on an enterprise purchase are involved. And if you think that in this room alone, 100% of people are using ChatGPT and 100% of people were using Google, which is AI anyway, you can see that if multiple people are giving an opinion on the vendor, everyone's opinion is shaped by this. You're not immune to this at any point in the journey. There's 27 touch points before sales are engaging, which is pulled from our specific customer set. So again, if we think about the nature of how people are making those decisions, I'm going to go into how you optimize this and how you become more present shortly. But if you think about that for a moment, all the content that you're making at your business is actually going to influence your AEO. And so unlike in SEO, where it was predominantly driven by your own content and third-party websites, in AEO, it's pulling in Reddit, YouTube, like all the different social platforms. It's pulling in review sites. So if everyone knows Trustpilot, for example, they're like the most important website in the world now. And you would have said a few years ago, like, I'm not sure how long that business will be as valuable as it's ever been. It's now like pulled into almost every query to judge what ordinary people think about a product. And so your review, the value of your reviews has skyrocketed for the first time in a very long time. It's now used to determine whether the answer is good about your brand, which I find like a monumental shift in how the internet works. So to give you a scale of the problem, there's now 900 million active weekly users on ChatGPT. There's 2 billion people who are using AI overviews, and 45% of B2B buyers used AI in a recent purchase. I suspect that that's actually biased towards like underplaying it, because of the amount of people nowadays who will use AI and try and pass it off as non-AI work, which is very prevalent everywhere. And there are telltale signs, obviously, in how it writes and so forth. But as time goes on, you can imagine that this is very important for vendor discussion. This is very important for buying decisions. This is very important for pitch lists. And all parts of that process are now going to be influenced by this. And this is the point. You can't hire just an AEO team like you used to hire an SEO team. Because now, if you think about what influences AEO, it's a whole different scope of work. And so I actually feel often a little bit bad for the SEO community, because AEO's happened and everyone's just gone, do AEO as well as SEO. But the scope has got so much bigger. And so imagine that we used to work for 20 years on coming up in just Google. Now we have to come up in Google, ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, Claude, Grok, and the list goes on and on and on. And if those platforms are important to your buyers, then this is a critical moment in time to rank up. So you have to rank for your key terms. You have to get cited in Reddit and LinkedIn because they're the two most cited sources. Like, how terrifying is that for enterprise businesses that Reddit and LinkedIn are now the two most cited sources within LLMs? That's like a staggering thing, because previously companies didn't care a huge amount about what happened in the Reddit sphere, whereas now that's being pulled in to influence the answers so much. And now the same with LinkedIn as well. YouTube has become, it's now the second most valuable source in any of the Google stack. So the Google stack is obviously traditional Google, AI overviews, AI mode, and Gemini. All of those four, which are the most used in the world, YouTube is now their second most cited source. And the list goes on, but obviously G2, Trustpilot, if you're in the hospitality space, it'd be things like TripAdvisor. These platforms are now influencing the answer more than you and your own content on your website ever could. And so it creates this sort of quandary that you have to influence more third-party content around your business than necessarily your own content. So how do you identify the problem? How do you work the problem out first and foremost? So you can't work on what you can't see. You can't put a plan in place or a work stream in place if you can't see how you're performing. And so back in January, the first thing we focused on was how do we show customers what they're currently appearing for within AI search. And so the way that you should do this, and you obviously don't have to use us to do this, you can do it manually. The way you should do that is you can take your pre-existing Google Search Console data, and on the panel earlier, they were talking about what do your customers actually say, which is important strategically anyway, but it's also important because that's what they're going to be typing in and prompting. That's what they're going to be asking. So every single prompt into ChatGPT or into Gemini, those questions are going to be the things that you want to try and capture in your business. And so the first thing you want to do is get a sense of how you and your competitors are performing for the key commercial terms. So if you were a CRM business, for example, you would want to see where you appear versus your core competitors within your segments. And then you'd want to see which content it was on the internet that was making them get ranked above you. Because in a example where only one or two vendors are going to come up in the answer, and you're the third vendor in that answer, you just don't get put on the list. You don't get considered at all. And so first things first is like to measure. Then you need to diagnose where you're absent from the answers. There will be staggering holes in most of the businesses I work with where they have for years and years relied on lots of core keyword searches, and they have dominated them over the years. And now suddenly they don't even appear when it comes to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of these. They're not even visible at all. If you think about what we said at the beginning, this is a massively rising trend, and this is only going to get more and more and more. And so the one thing I want to add is content on the internet right now is being ingested by the LLMs to formulate their answers, right? Which means that the content that they are spitting out is what it's giving back to all of us, who then use it to create more content, and then they ingest it and then spit it out. And so there is an unbelievable compound effect of content on the internet right now being ingested and given back out. And so if you're performing badly in this, it's quite easy for that to compound and have a very negative experience over time. And so one of the things we released recently was like sentiment tracking for people. So how positively or negatively is your brand received in AI search? And that's like a perfect example of how things can compound negatively over time. Lots of negative reviews about customer service for a product gets ingested by the LLMs. If you ask an opinion about the brand, it's the negative customer service. That person who's writing about the brand is now writing with the context that there's negative customer service. So it's a massively compounding problem. So you have to diagnose where you're absent, who's being recommended, and which sources AI is training itself on. so that either you can create your own version of that content, or you can try and influence a third-party source, whether it's a newspaper, a magazine, a blog, an information site, a review site, Reddit, any of these, YouTube, any of these sources that's formulating their answer, and then acting upon it. So as I said, I think this is a much bigger problem than organizations are giving it credit for, because of the scope of it, of how many surfaces you actually have to affect change on. And so for me, I would say first things first is identifying the most commercial terms that you're losing on and the most commercial terms that you care the most about. And so you can do that by pulling out the Google search data I was talking about before, formulating a variety of prompts. So what someone's searching to find the answer, which is your business, product or service, and then running that yourself within these models and just seeing how you appear. You could do that manually now. You could do it on your phone. You could see that your core customer, if they're like a Claude user and they're looking for a software, like, do you come up? Or if they're a ChatGPT user or what have you. And so creating content is more important now than it's ever been. Creating content at scale is more important now than it's ever been. I think on the panel, they were talking about the S word, whether it was slop or shit. And I suppose same thing. Just because the AI allows us to produce a high quantity doesn't mean that we should. And I've worked with a lot of companies recently who have embraced AI fully, but all that means is that the content that's coming out is terrible. And the machines are easily good enough to detect whether it's AI generated, whether it's valuable. And so a lot of people have seen this in their traffic, like, and then down immediately. And so you don't want to replace human beings in the process at all. If you think about it like this, the surface area for what we have to optimize has just got 7 times bigger, 8 times bigger. And so you need the same amount of people or more people using AI to produce the level of content and quality of content and influencing third-party sources than you ever have before. And so all this stuff about like job losses and stuff, in marketing, it's the opposite. You need more people than you've ever had to affect more change on more surfaces. And then maintenance. So there's a sort of overarching thought in the AI search space that you can't attribute human traffic, which is just incorrect. It's like an incorrect understanding of the space. You can just set up to see when Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT hits your website, when it's training off your content, and when it starts serving your content in the prompts to customers, and then you can see the human referrals. So that's just a myth. So you can set this all up perfectly so that you see where you're appearing in the models, you see how much human traffic is coming through, and as a result, even if that number doesn't rival traditional search, which it will not, traditional search is much, much bigger, you can take the view that if we move early on this and the world is going to become more AI, which I think we probably all would agree at this point, we're sort of 4 years in and it's got to where it's got to. Imagine another 4 years, it's going to be all we talk about. And so if you get on top of it now, you're going to be able to attribute real human beings, real sales, real traffic, etc. very, very soon. And all you'd need to do is set up scripts on websites, etc. So I thought I'd show you what we put together for it to give you an idea. Everything I've talked about can be done manually. Everything I've talked about can be done with lots of other different tools. But the way we try and think about it is coming back to that problem that there's 7, 8, 9, 10 times more work than there's ever been. So AI is the perfect use case for doing that. AI is the perfect use case for helping people output. And so what we've tried to do is give every single company their own agent, so they have perfect context of all their data. So they have perfect context of all their prompts on all the models, all their competitors, how they're performing. And as a result, overnight, it could say to you, competitor B has overtaken you for 4 commercial terms, and it's because of these 2 articles they just got published in X Press. And the next morning you would know that, and the next morning you could be working on it, and you could ask the agent to start working on it for you. I'd say that I've never seen an AI, no matter how good, and I worked at Lovable in the growth team for a long time, and so that was like a crazy experience. I've never seen an AI get anything right first time. And I've never seen an AI get anything 100% perfect. And so even with this, our customers have content teams, strategy teams, etc., just being able to cover more ground. And so it's producing 80% of their work, and they're the really important last 20% of delivering that work. But whether it's automating reports or automating content creation or content plans or outreach plans, this can do it for you now. And I've seen a lot of the brands that we work with now have been able to quite clearly drive huge traffic, huge awareness, huge visibility from their target customer set. And you know, some changes at the beginning of the journey don't have to be significant. And so you don't have to change everything to make sure that you're coming up in AI search. I'd say that the first 60 days feels like a very positive experience for most companies who start optimizing, because there are technical things you need to do, there are pieces of content, there are the right prompts, etc. And so unlike SEO, which if anyone's worked in before, when we used to sell it in 2019, I worked with like just big enterprises back then. You would have to say in the first meeting, nothing we do will have a positive effect for 6 to 9 months. It was a really hard sell because that was also the truth. It was really competitive, and influencing Google is very difficult for any high volume terms. Whereas because most companies haven't moved on this, you can see very positive change very, very quickly for brands comparatively. So the 4 questions to ask your team who's in this space would be like, how often is our brand being mentioned versus our competitors for our core terms? I'd say that would be like a really good start. And if we don't know that, then we have to drill into how we're appearing, how we're performing. Then what's the sentiment when your business is mentioned? What does the LLM think about you? What's its opinion of you? Because we need to drill into where that came from. We need to understand which reviews, which content, which Reddit thread, etc., which journalists are influencing that answer. What is the AI saying about your business? This is like a really interesting one, but so many people say, AI's just got my business wrong. And it's like, the AI is just training itself off the internet. It's not a being, it's a computer. Like, it's just ingesting the information online and repeating it back out. And so rather than get annoyed about it, you need to work out where it got the wrong info from. Like, which article fed that wrong info to it, and then start trying to correct that. And then the 4th one, I'd say, for years we called it like backlink building and then digital PR. And now I would just say that the most underspoken about thing in marketing these days is how important third-party sources are to your business, to the perception of your business, to the sentiment of your business, to any answer that comes up from your business. And so drilling into that is very important. So I thought, in the case of everyone here, if you have any questions about your own businesses, my goal will be I will try and give you a deliberate answer about your business, tactically what you should do. Not strategically, I'll try and actually give you the answer as to what your business should do, if I can take questions like this.
Yeah, of course you can take questions. And I'm sure, Chris, that was amazing. So thank
Thanks,
you very
Mark.
much. Sure, you do.
I'm shocked Jake's in with the first question. Jake is our AI guy, so I'm sure he's going to answer something really interesting.